بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. My dear respected brothers, my little ones, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Imam Muslim relates in his Sahih, in a hadith narrated to us by Hazrat Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, in which he says, "Ittala an-Nabiy sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa nahnu natadhakar." That upon occasion, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he appeared before us. He appeared before us whilst we were engaged in conversation. And he said to us, "Ma tadhkurun?" What are you discussing? What are you talking about? To which the Sahaba, ridwanullah alayhim ajma'een, they replied, "Nazkur as-sa'a." That, O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we are discussing the final hour. We are talking about the final hour. To which the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam responded and said, إنها لن تقوم حتى رأوا قبلها 10 آيات. That indeed the final hour will not descend until you see before it 10 major signs. The final hour will not arise until you see before it 10 major signs. فذكر الدخان. He mentioned the smoke. You see, before the end of time, the whole world will be covered in smoke. But the Muslims, the believers, will be affected by this smoke no worse than they are affected by a cold. But as for the disbelievers, as for those who deny the existence of their Creator, this smoke will roast their heads. وَذَكَرَ الدَّجَّالِ. And he mentioned the Antichrist, who will come out before the end of times. And he will go around the world causing fitna. And he will say to you that he is your Lord. وَذَكَرَ الدَّابَّةِ. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he made mention of the beast that will come out of Al-Haram Al-Makki. With it, he will have the ring of Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salatu wassalam. And he will have the staff of Musa alayhi salatu wassalam. With the staff of Musa alayhi salam, he will go to every believer in the world and he will draw a line of light on their face, by which their face will become luminous and bright. And with this ring of Sulaiman alayhi salatu wassalam, he will stamp the nose of every kafir, by which his face will become black. There will be total distinction between the believers and the disbelievers before the day of judgment. وَطُلُوعَ الشَّمْسِ مِنْ مَغْرِبِهَا. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he made mention of the sun. Every day since the beginning of creation, the sun has risen from the east and it sets in the west. But there will come a day, and no doubt about it, that day will soon come, that the sun will rise from its place of its setting. The sun will rise from the west. وَنُزُولَ عِيسَى ibn Maryam. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he made mention of the descension of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wassalam. My brothers, it is the belief of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah that Isa alayhi salatu wassalam will return to this dunya for a second time. وَيَأْجُوجُ وَمَأْجُوجُ. And he made mention of the two tribes, Gog and Magog, who have been imprisoned behind the iron gate by Zulqarnain. وَثَلَاثَةَ خُسُوفٍ. And he mentioned 3 landslides. Landslides like never seen before. خَصْفٌ بِالْمَشْرِقِ وَخَصْفٌ بِالْمَغْرِبِ وَخَصْفٌ بِجَزِيرَةِ الْعَرَبِ. There will be a landslide in the east. There will be a landslide in the west. And there will be a landslide in the Arabian Peninsula. وَآخِرُ ذَلِكَ. And the last of the signs, نار تخرج من اليمن تطرد الناس إلى محشرهم. And the last and final sign will be a fire that will break out in Yemen, that will drive the people, that will force the people to gather in the place of their gathering. Knowing that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the last of all messengers to come, knowing that him and the final day was sent kahatain, like the index finger and the middle finger. What is the gap between the index finger and the middle finger? There is no gap. This is how soon the day of judgment will come. Knowing this, there were times where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would advise the Sahaba, would inform the Sahaba, would give nasiha to the Sahaba from Fajr till the setting of the sun. The hadith in Sahih Muslim, the narrator Abu Zayd al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu, he says, Salla bina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam al-Fajr, ثم صعد المنبر فخطبنا. That upon occasion the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he prayed the Fajr Salah. Then he ascended the pulpit and he began to give a khutbah. He began to deliver a sermon until the time for Zuhr began. فنزل فصلى ثم صعد المنبر فخطبنا حتى حضرت العصر. He prayed the Zuhr Salah. Then he ascended the pulpit once again. And again he started to give a khutbah until the time for Asr began. Then the narrator mentions, فنزل فصلى ثم صعد المنبر حتى غربت الشمس. He prayed the Asr Salah, but he did not retire after the Asr Salah. He ascended the pulpit. He ascended the pulpit and he began to advise the Sahaba again until the sun set and it was time for Maghrib. From Fajr till Maghrib, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam advised the Sahaba bima huwa kan wa bima huwa kain, of every fitna from the time of Adam till the day of judgment. Why? Because on learning about the day of judgment, on learning about the fitnas that will befall us before the final hour, we begin to fear Allah. However, look at the state of the Muslims today. It is like Allah says, كَلَّا بَلْ تُكَذِّبُونَ بِالدِّينِ. It is like as though we do not believe in the words of Allah. And it is not our tongues that are saying this, it is our a'mal that are saying this. Our actions are saying that we do not believe in the final hour. Go out into the streets of UK today. Look at the Muslim youth. Who would think that a day would come that you would go to the streets and you will see Muslim youth, some are hooked on crack, some are hooked on smack, some are weed, whilst others on speed? Who would think that a day would come that Muslims would begin to not only drink alcohol but become landlords of pubs and discos and nightclubs and casinos? Who would think a day would come that married Muslim men would openly begin to fornicate with married Muslim women? For how long will we deny the situation that we are in? أيحسب الإنسان أن لن نجمع عظامه أيحسب الإنسان أن لن نجمع عظامه. Does mankind think that the Creator is not capable of bringing all your bones back together? Listen to the words of the Quran. Listen to what Allah is telling you. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. That surely, indeed, verily, certainly, you will return to your Lord and you will be informed of everything that you did in this dunya. How close is this day? The hadith of Abu Hurairah mentions, لما فرغ الله من خلق السماوات والأرض خلق الصور فأعطاه إسرافيل فهو واضعه في فيه. That when Allah completed the creation of the heavens and the earth, He created the sur, He created the horn. And He gave this horn to Israfil alayhi salatu wassalam. Israfil alayhi salatu wassalam, the angel who will blow the trumpet on the final hour, he already has the horn in his mouth. فَهُوَ وَاضِعُهُ فِي فِي. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, مَا أَتْرَكَ صَاحِبُ السُّورِ مُنْذُ وُكِّلَ بِهِ. that the Sahib of the Sur, meaning Hazrat Israfil alayhi salam, has not left the horn except that it is already within his mouth. Mahafatan ayyukmara bis-sayha. Fearing, he's already prepared to blow out into the trumpet, fearing that the command of Allah will come before he can even take a blink. And on that day, when the command will come, فَفَزِيَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا مَنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ. Everyone in the heavens and the earth will become terrified, will become so frightened, will become so terrified with fear, except for whomsoever Allah wills to save on that day. And on that day, the angel Israfil alayhi salam will not get tired. The hadith says, فَيَمُدُّهَا وَيَطِيلُهَا وَلَا يُفْتِرُ. He will begin to blow into the trumpet, and he will continue to blow, and he will continue to spread terror in the entire universe. You see these mountains that you see today, the K2, the Himalayas, the Everest, the peaks at which touch the sky. Why were the mountains created? Allah says, وَأَلْقَيْنَا فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِكُمْ وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا. That we created the mountains as pegs. We created them to stabilize the ground. But on that day, these mountains that you see, which are strong, stabilizing the earth today, when they hear the sound of the horn, these mountains will become terrified. These mountains will become confused. These mountains will become agitated. These mountains will begin to start panicking. وَتَرَى الْجِبَالَ كَالْإِحْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ. Allah says that you will see the mountains flying around you like cotton wool. You will see them moving past you, مَرَّ السَّحَابِ, like the clouds. Let alone the mountains, the ground beneath you. إِنَّ زَلْزَلَةَ السَّاعَةِ شَيْءٌ عَظِيمٌ. Allah says indeed, the zalzala, the earthquake, the shaking of the final hour, shay'un azim, will be so terrifying that the earth will begin to tremble and shake with fear. And the people on the land on that day, imagine a ship, imagine a vessel in the middle, in the depths of an ocean, caught in the middle of a hurricane. This is how the people will be on that day when the trumpet will be blown. Tamurru marra sahab. They will be moving around. Tadribuhum al-amwaj. You will see the wave throws a ship around. Imagine a ship caught in a hurricane and the waves moving it from one side to another. This is how the people will be when the trumpet is blown on the final hour. And then when the people will look up at the sky, it will be like the burning filth, the boiling filth of oil. And how true are the words of Allah. وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ انْفَطَرَتْ. And when the skies will be cleft asunder. وَإِذَا الْكَوَاكِبُ انْتَثَرَتْ. And when the stars will become dispersed. You see, today the stars were created زِينَةً لِلسَّمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا, to beautify the sky of this dunya. وَبِالنَّجْمِهُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. Allah tells us that the stars were created to guide the traveler, but on that day the stars will lose their light. On that day the stars will lose their light. وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ فُجِّرَتْ. And the oceans will set forth. وَإِذَا الْقُبُورُ بُعْثِرَتْ. And when the graves will be overturned. عَلِمَتْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ وَأَخَّرَتْ. Every soul shall know what he or she sent ahead. This is the reality on the day of judgment. You see, youngsters like you and I today, youngsters like yourselves, strong as oxes, on that day, what does Allah tell us? يَوْمَ يَجْعَلُ الْبِلْدَانَ شِيبًا. Due to the terror of the horn on that day, youngsters, they may be only 15 years old, they may be only 20 years old, they may be only 25 years old. Hair full of black will turn white in that split second. They'll become old in a split second due to the terror of the horn. وَتَرَى النَّاسَ سُكَارَى وَمَا هُمْ بِسُكَارَى وَلَكِنَّ عَذَابَ اللَّهِ شَدِيدٌ. And you will see people will be in a drunken state. But in reality, they will not be drunk. but the torment of Allah will be severe. And on that day, you will see mothers who are nursing their children. The mother will forget she is a mother. The mother will forget that she has a 6-month-old baby to nurse. No mother will remember that she has a 1-year-old child to look after. Mothers will begin to throw away their children. Every pregnant woman will be relieved of her load. And when the sky comes tearing apart, when the ground starts shaking and splitting up, when the stars lose their shine and everything becomes dark, the angel of death, he will come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is all knowing of who remains, and he will say to Allah, that all the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth have died. Illa Jibra'il wa Mika'il, except for Jibra'il and Mika'il, wa hamalat arshik, and except for the angels that carry your arsh. Then Allah will say, let death come to Jibra'il, let death come to Mika'il, let death come to the angels who carry my arsh. Then Malakul Maut will come back to Allah Azza wa Jal, and Allah is all knowing, but he will say, Man baqiya, wa qila faman baqiya. And the angel of death will say, Baqita anta al-hayy alladhi la yamut. That you, the one who will not perish, remains. Wa baqitu ana, and I remain. And then Allah will say, Anta khalqun min khalqi, khalaqtuka lima ra'ayt. That you are a creation from my creation, and you have been created for a purpose, and you have served that purpose. Famut fayamut. So may you perish too, and the angel of death will perish. And in the narration he mentioned that when the angel of death will perish, he will shriek so loud that everything in the heavens and the earth will be able to hear the scream and the shriek. And then Allah will have all of the earth in his grasp. قبضته يوم القيامة والسماوات مطيات بيمينه. The skies will be rolled up like a scroll in his hand. And Allah will say, أنا الجبار أنا الجبار لمن الملك اليوم. That I am the omnipotent, I am the Jabbar. From whom is the kingdom today? For whom is the divine rule today? أين المتجبرون? أين المتكبرون? Where are your superpowers today? Where are the kings today? Where are the leaders of the world today? لمن الملك اليوم? For whom is the kingdom today? For whom is the divine rule today? No one will answer. Allah will answer. لله الواحد القهار. لله الواحد القهار. For Allah, the one, the only, the irresistible. How true are the words of the Quran. هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. That he is the first, there is none before him. And he is the last, there will be none after him. He is the most high, there is nothing above him. And he is the most near, there is nothing closer than him. And he is the knower of all things. This is our Creator, Allah. In a hadith collected by Imam Muslim in Sahih, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا عبادي إني حرمت الظلم على نفسي وجعلته بينكم محرما فلا تظالموا. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed I have made oppression, dhulm, haram upon myself, and I have made it haram amongst you, so do not oppress one another. Then Allah goes on to say that يا عبادي كلكم ضال إلا من هديته فاستهدوني أهدكم. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed in reality every one of you is misguided, except for he whom I have guided, so seek for guidance in me. Then Allah goes on to say that يا عبادي كلكم جائع إلا من أطعمته فاستطعموني أطعمكم. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed in reality every one of you is in a state of hunger, except for he whom I have provided food for. So seek for your sustenance in me, and I shall provide you your sustenance. Then Allah goes on to say that, Ya ibadi, كلكم عاد إلا من كسوته فاستأسوني أكسكم. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed every one of you in reality is naked and has no clothes, except for he whom I have given clothes to. So seek for your clothing in me, and I shall provide you your clothes. Then Allah goes on to say that, Ya ibadi, إنكم لن تبلغوا ضري فتضروني ولن تبلغوا نفعي فتنفعوني. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed none of you can cause me any benefit, nor can you cause me any harm. Then Allah goes on to say that, Ya ibadi, إنكم تخطئون بالليل والنهار وأنا أغفر الذنوب جميعا فاستغفروني أغفر لكم. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed you commit sins throughout the whole night and the day. You sin throughout the whole night and the day. And I forgive all sins. So seek for forgiveness in me, and I shall forgive all your sins. Then Allah goes on to say, Ya ibadi, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على أتقى قلب رجل واحد منكم ما زاد ذلك في ملكي شيئا. That all my slaves, all my servants, if the first and the last, the mankind and the jinn, were all to be on the most God-fearing heart of one of you, that will not increase in my kingdom even the slightest. Then Allah goes on to say that, Ya ibadi, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على أفجر قلب رجل واحد منكم ما نقص ذلك من ملكي شيئا. That all my slaves, all my servants, if every one of you, the first and the last, the mankind and the jinn, were all to have the most transgressing heart of one of you, that will not decrease from my kingdom even the slightest. Then Allah goes on to say that, Ya ibadi, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم قاموا في صعيد واحد فسألوني فأعطيت كل إنسان مسألته ما نقص ذلك مما عندي. That all my slaves, all my servants, if the first and the last, the mankind and the jinn, were all to stand on one plane of land, were to all stand on one plane of land, and were to all ask of me, each and every soul, his heart's content, and I were to give every single soul what their heart desired, that will not decrease from my kingdom, إِلَّا كَمَا يَنْقُصُ الْمِخْيَةُ إِذَا أُدْخِلَ الْبَحْرِ, except the way a needle decreases from an ocean when it is dipped into an ocean. The reality is, my brothers, that when a needle is dipped into an ocean, not an ounce of that ocean is decreased. Then Allah says, Ya ibadi, innama hiya a'malukum uhsiha lakum, thumma waffikum iyyaha, faman wajada khayran, falyahmadillah, wa man wajada ghayra dhalik, fala yalumanna illa nafsa. That all my slaves, all my servants, indeed, these are your good deeds which I preserved and I record for you. And I will give you their recompense on the day of judgment. So whomsoever finds good, let him praise Allah. And whomsoever finds anything other than that, then let him not blame except himself. Then the hadith of Abu Hurairah mentions that then Allah will bring back to life Jibreel and Mikael alayhim as-salam. ثم ينزل من تحت العرش الماء ويأمر الله أن تنبت فتنبت كنبات البقر. That then Allah will command for water to descend from His arsh, and this water will descend and it will rain for 40 days, and this rain will go to all the bodies that have been buried, and they will begin to grow. Everybody who once lived, no matter where his body was, no matter where his or her body was, Allah will bring it back to life. And they will grow like vegetables grow. Then Allah will command for all the souls to be put into the sur. And He will bring back Israfil alayhi salam, and commanding to blow the trumpet for the second time. And the narration mentioned that when the souls are blown out of the trumpet for the second time, it will be as though there are bees swarming in the sky. يوم تبدل الأرض غير الأرض والسماوات وبرزوا لله الواحد القهار. The earth and the sky will be changed and will be not known to you as you know it today. فَيَذَرُهَا قَاءً صَفْصَفًا. There will be a white plain field. There will be no crookedness therein. And every soul from the time of Adam till the time the first trumpet was blown, when the whole universe perished, every soul will be brought back to life. The kuffar, upon awaking, they will be confused. And it's like the Quran says, they will say, Ya waylana, man ba'athana min marqadina. The woe to us, who has raised us from our place of rest. The first person to be resurrected on the day of judgment will be none other than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam tells us that on the day of resurrection, he will be the first to be resurrected. The ground beneath him will begin to shake, and a door will be opened above him until he can see the arsh of Allah. And then a door beneath him will be opened until he can see the seventh earth. And then a door on the right will be open for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he will see Jannah and the manazil of his ashab. And then the earth will begin to shake, and he will say to the earth, Ya ayyatuha al-ard, malak, the O earth, what is wrong with you? Why are you shaking tremendously? And the earth will begin to speak, and he will say that Allah has commanded me to take out that which is within me. And on that day, kullu abdin yub'as ala ma mata alayhi. My brothers, listen carefully to this. Kullu abdin yub'as ala ma mata alayhi. Every person that dies will be resurrected the way that they died. You see, the reality is that death will come to you the way you live your life. So if you live a life of sin, you live a life of intoxicants, you live a life fornicating and committing adultery, you live a life consuming alcohol, you'll be raised on that day doing that same sin. On that day there will be people who will be raised who used to drink wine in the world. They will be raised on the day of judgment with cups in their hand drinking wine. Those who committed adultery in the world will be raised on the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah, and they will be doing the same sin. And there will be some people whose sins were so evil in the eyes of Allah that Allah will change their appearance on the day of judgment so that they will stand out in front of everyone else. فَمِنْهُمْ عَلَى سُورَةِ الْقِرَضَةِ وَمِنْهُمْ عَلَى سُورَةِ الْخَنَازِيرِ. So there will be people with faces like monkeys. Those who used to backbite in the world, their faces will be like the faces of monkeys on that day. وَمِنْهُمْ عَلَى سُورَةِ الْخَنَازِيرِ. There will be those whose faces will be like pigs. وَمِنْهُمْ مُنَكَّسِينَ. Listen carefully. The Muslims are committing this sin today. Those who give interest, those who take interest, those who consume interest, they will be raised on the day of judgment. أَرْجُلَهُمْ أَعْلَاهُمْ. That their feet will be above them, and they will be made to walk on their faces. And there will be those who will be raised with no arms. Those who oppress their neighbors will be raised with no arms. There will be those who will be raised blind who used to oppress other people. There will be those who will be raised deaf and blind who had pride over their deeds. On that day, Rasulullah mentioned, أَجْوَعْ مَا كَانُوا قَطُّ أَضْمَعْ مَا كَانُوا قَطُّ أَنْصَبْ مَا كَانُوا قَطُّ. You'll be hungry like never before. You'll be thirsty like never before. You'll be tired like never before. You'll be hungry except for those who gave food for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll be thirsty except for those who gave water for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll be tired like never before except for those who helped the needy whilst they were in the dunya. This will be the state of mankind on that day. يوم يفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وأبيه وصاحبته. On that day, mother will not remember her child, son will not remember his father, sister will not remember her brother, brother will not remember his sister. Let alone remembering your relations. What does Allah tell us? يود المجرم لو يفتدي من عذاب يومئذ ببنيه وصاحبته وأخيه وفصيلته التي تؤويه ومن في الأرض جميعا ثم ينجيه كلا إنها لظى نزاعة للشوى تدعو من أدبر وتولى فجمع فأوعى. What does Allah tell us? That let alone running away from your own next of kin, people upon seeing the punishment of that day, they will want to ransom with their own flesh and blood. A father will run away from his son, fearing that his son will ask for one good deed on that day. A mother will run away from her own child, fearing that the child will ask for one good deed on that day. Let alone that, parents will begin to want to ransom their own flesh and blood to save themselves from the torment of that day. And on that day, the sun, today it sits 1,000,000 miles away, on that day the sun will just be above your heads. There will be people drowning in their sweat up to their knees, some up to the waistline, some up to their necks, according to the sins that they committed. And as you see this on the day of judgment, what else will you see on the field of resurrection? You will see a group of people under the shade of the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whilst this is the state of mankind, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has told us, سَبْعَةٌ يُذِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. Now there are 7 types of people who will be under the shade of Allah, under the shade of the arsh of Allah, on that day when there is no shade except for His shade. Who are those people? Imamun Adil, a ruler who is just and upright, and one which is relative to us today, وَشَابٌ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ, and a youngster, a person in his youth who grew up worshipping Allah. My brothers, every single one of you today sat before me, your hair is still black, your muscles are still strong, you have the ability to walk and to use your limbs for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have no difficulty in offering your salah. You have no difficulty in fasting during the month of Ramadan. You have no difficulty in performing pilgrimage to the house of Allah. These days of your youth, if you spend these days of your youth worshipping Allah, you will be under the shade and you'll be protected from all of that which we discussed today. And who else is from amongst the 7 people? وَرَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, a man whose heart is connected with the masajid. My brothers, spend time in the house of Allah. Spend time in the house of Allah. Spending time in the house of Allah, falling in love with the house of Allah, doing khidmah for the house of Allah, cleaning up the house of Allah, looking after the house of Allah, financially contributing towards the upkeep of the house of Allah, looking after the people who serve the community, the imams, the ulama, the huffaz, doing what is required for the masjid. Having that love and connection for the masjid, this is a means of your salvation on that day. وَرَجُلَانِ, there are many of you who are probably close friends today. Your friendship can take you to Jannah. Let me tell you how, my brothers. وَرَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّا فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَا عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَا عَلَيْهِ. 2 friends who only integrate and segregate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You tell me, my brothers, where else other than the masjid and the madrasa and the marakiz would you find a friend who you only meet for the sake of Allah and who you only depart from for the sake of Allah? in having pious company, in having good friends. This will be a means of your salvation on that day. And another person who will be saved on that day is a man who is called to indecency by a woman of good lineage and good looks. And he says, Inni akhafullah, that indeed I fear Allah. Again, many of you youngsters today who are caught up in the temptations and the fitna of the world and the fitna around going towards zina, you protect yourself from this major crime, you will be under the shade of Allah on that day. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Man admanu li ma bayna lihyay wa ma bayna fakhizay admanu lahu al-jannah. That whomsoever guarantees for me two things, I guarantee for him Jannah. That which is between his jaws and that which is between his private parts. You can protect these two things, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has guaranteed you Jannah. So we spoke about Imam Adil, وَالشَّابْ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ ورجل قلبه معلق في المساجد ورجلان تحابا في الله اجتمع عليه وتفرقا عليه ورجل ينفق في سبيل الله حتى لا يعلم شماله ما ينفق يمينه كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. A man who spends in the way of Allah so much until his left hand does not even know what his right hand has spent. A man who gives in the way of Allah and he doesn't think about how much he is giving. So at Jummah time when the bucket goes round, what do? We take out our notes where we find the 1p, 2p, 5p, 10p and put them in the bucket. No, my brothers, you put your hand in your pocket, whatever comes out you put it in that bucket and you have tawakkul on Allah. This is your salvation. That you give in the way of Allah until your left hand does not even know what your right hand has given. And what was the last one? Who can tell me in the crowd what was the last one? وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا حَتَّى فَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. A man who remembers Allah in seclusion until tears begin to flow from his eyes. Let me tell you, my brothers, men greater than you and I cried for the sake of Allah. Men stronger than you and I, more powerful than you and I, cried for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Men like Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar Allahu anhu, would cry profusely in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me finish off with the story. Upon occasion, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hazrat Umar Allahu anhu, he was in the outskirts of Medina and he came across a woman who was putting her children to sleep, who had no food. She had stones in a stove, hoping that the children would think that mom is cooking us a meal, and in waiting for the food to be prepared they would fall asleep. This woman was in such a desperate state, in such desperate need. Amir al-Mu'mineen was unaware of this woman's location. She did not reside in Medina Munawwara. She resided in the outskirts of Medina. No one knew of her dwelling place. When he saw her, he said to her, what is your opinion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar Allahu anhu? She said, I complained to Allah about Umar. He said, maybe he does not know of your state. She said, he's Amir. She didn't know it was him. She said, he's Amir al-Mu'mineen. How can he not know of my state? When he heard these words, he came back to the Bayt al-Mal. He filled up a sack with his own hands. Remember, he's the leader of the superpower of that time. He said that if he lived 10 years longer, he would have conquered the entire world. The leader of the superpower of that time, he goes to the Bayt al-Mal, he carries a sack full of food and he brings it to this woman and he cooks the food with his own hands. On his way to carrying there, his servant says to him that let me carry the sack. He says no. He says let me carry it. He says no. He says let me carry it. Upon which Umar becomes angry and he says, will you carry my sins for me on the day of judgment? And then he goes back to this woman and he cooks the food and smoke starts to come out of his beard and he waits with those children until he saw them laugh out of contentment and out of being satisfied that the hunger has been satisfied, like he saw them crying and weeping out of hunger. And that very night, when Amir al-Mu'mineen returned home, he did not fall asleep. He cried until the Fajr Salah, weeping in front of Allah. My brothers, I ask you today, how many times when we switch on our TVs, when we go onto our telephones, when we go on our social media accounts, and we see people affected by the earthquakes, people affected by the famine around the world, our brothers and sisters in Baytul Maqdis, doing a Fard Kifaya on our behalf. When we see all of this, how many tears come out of our eyes? You remember, the one who remembers Allah so much that tears begin to flow, it is no deficiency in you in crying in front of your Creator. Remember, this is a means of your salvation on that day. If you want a place under the arsh of Allah, then let us take heed of what has been said today. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. I pray Allah keep us united in this dunya and realize in Jannah al Firdaus.